There's also a collaboration platform where, besides several other sectors and chains inside the Amazon, there's also the funding and the promotion of financial mechanisms that can be dedicated to financing or funding the bioeconomy. So we're going to discuss the challenges that make funding not get there in the speed and in the standard or format that is necessary to be able to make the socioeconomy in the Amazon develop stronger and get to a bigger scale. We're also going to talk about why this happens and understanding the costs of the transaction. Many times this does not allow the financing companies to be interested or to provide funding to socioeconomy and bioeconomy and the tickets that are ideal. And we're also going to be able to discuss the risks that are perceived, the maturity of the organizations and the chains and the business dedicated to sociobioeconomy, or the economy of biodiversity in the Amazon. And we're going to also expose a little bit more of the work of each of the panel members. So we have the multilateral organizations, the development organizations, the foundations, as well as an indigenous foundation that is going to give us their perspective about the population, the original population. It is worth mentioning the work that the task force of the network is developing. So we have several studies coordinating the elaboration of work. They're going to dedicate themselves to the topics that I just mentioned, and we're working to categorize mechanisms, financial mechanisms that are dedicated to support the business of the sociobioeconomy in the Amazon. And we have been promoting this debate where we'll also be able to approach the different sorts of capital that can bring a collaboration in the sense of financing the production chains in the Amazon. We understand that the philanthropy is very important to reduce the risk as well as to bring the financing as well as agglomerate the other capital. We can also support the financial mechanisms for the reduction of the transaction costs. So in this way, we'll be able to understand that the individual costs can be diluted through the different tickets, which are the ones that are necessary and that are adapted to the reality of the sociobioeconomy. We understand above all that it is necessary to add technical assistance, considering the peculiarities that are in these production chains currently, where there is volatility, where there is a seasonality, a huge seasonality of the products, of socio-biodiversity, and how philanthropy as well as financial innovation, so in other words, funding needs to follow up in these diversity characteristics and the variability, and of course, the cultural and traditional aspects of the population involved with sociobioeconomy for centuries. So now I'm going to invite Maria José Andrade Cerda from Confeniai to bring a little bit of the perception of the indigenous population and the financing of the bioeconomy. So Maju Andrade, please. Hello, good morning. I'm going to speak in Spanish, and all of you can use the translation services. So my name is Maria José Andrade Cerda, and I am Quechua from the Quechua population in Ecuador. And nowadays, I am part of the community development group here, and there are several things. We have several things present in our economy, and then we also have this in the bioeconomic population here. So 2 weeks ago, we launched the Paraguas brand that is called Con Amazonia, with the Amazon. And among several other things, we made several analyses, 2 years already, of what we needed and what the indigenous population needed in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So this is the result. We needed a platform to help us or to lead us to these indigenous populations, because then it becomes easier for the brand, the Paraguas brand. It's easier to be recognized. And we have several barriers for the entrepreneurs in Ecuador, in Latin America, and especially for the indigenous population. So our brand, called Paraguas, it tries to promote the enterprises that we have, and they are going through several phases, and it is now already recognized. And this happens because Miúde, the economy, has been seen through this indigenous perspective, and it was not considering other variables, other things that are important for the indigenous population in the analysis of which is what we did starting last year. And we realized that we were talking about economies in the Amazon, but it was not, they didn't include this indigenous population perspective, the language, the traditional practices, and the way that we used to work with economy before. So when we think about an economy in the Amazon, we usually think about the great industries like mining and the oil and gas industry, and now using monoculture of the large companies. So as soon as we started approaching the indigenous population and the way that they have the economy working, we were not talking about that. And we were thinking about this in a practical sense. So the task forces, the exchange that we did, and all of this was being forgotten before, because we didn't have the capital at this point. We didn't have the economic gains, the monetary gains that we were able to observe in this common economy market. Let's call it that. They thought that the economy was only to generate money, but in fact, for the indigenous people, it was the well-being. So as from this, we have to think about the economies and the indigenous economies. We have to talk about the community benefits that are connected to this population and the people around. And these economic initiatives, they are not only going to impact the families involved, but the territory as a whole. And we're thinking about, or we're talking about, how this results in the impact to the whole territory. So in the trees, the forests, the sources of water, all of this is involved in the indigenous economy, and we have to take it into consideration always, and especially with the participation of women, who are the people who have this knowledge and they practice this sort of economy. And there should also be the involvement of the elderly people and the young people who are going to capture this knowledge and are going to make this permanent and pass it on through the generations. So we try to follow up this sort of initiatives that had answers about the needs of the communities. So what we have avoided, in fact, is several agendas. As you all know, the economic projects in general, when we're talking about the indigenous population, this is only according to certain indicators. The first indicator is the promotion of the enterprises. Second indicator is the involvement of the families. But what do we actually need in the medium and long term? And this is something that we have to think about. We have to think about the resilience of the communities and their participation in the process. The indicators are not going to use this all in the medium and long term, and they were not made to do this in the medium and long term. So our proposal is to have a technical follow-up, starting with our perspective or considering our cultural generational perspective and through the generations. And that's what we need to be able to talk about the indigenous community. And considering this, I think I'm going to conclude, basically, that's what I had to say, but we have, beyond the challenges that separate us as indigenous and non-indigenous populations in the Amazon, we have to find a common point, a common follow-up point, and that we're willing to do this and always thinking about respect and for us to be respected, and we respect other people as well. So we should all respect each other and our cultures so that our leadership will become even stronger, because we're here to do this kind of activity with all of you. So once again, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to all the panelists that are here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Jose. That was beautiful, what you said. And it's how the economy has another meaning as from the indigenous perspective. And it's always very positive to hear this, to hear you. Thank you. So now I'm going to call your friend Maria Jose Lopez, that is with FIPS, and I'm going to invite her to talk a little bit about the programs that are being developed by the Confederation, by the Corporation, Popular Finance in Ecuador, in response to this kind of need, a different kind of perspective of the economy that will lead to well-being, and it's intergenerational and with long-term views. Your friend told you, as your colleague with the same name said. So talk about a little bit of the work you've been developing. So good morning, everyone, and I'm very quickly going to talk about the work that has been done at CONAFIPS about bioeconomy. So CONAFIPS is the Corporation of Popular Financing, and it is a second-level bank in Ecuador, and it was created with the proposal of strengthening solidarity and also having financial inclusion in the country. Different from a traditional bank, CONAFIPS does not provide credit directly to people, but we do this through cooperatives with the economy of credit and also the drivers that act in the national territory, and especially in the rural and indigenous areas and these sectors that are historically rejected or not included by the financial sector. So CONAFIPS wanted to strengthen the funding system, always considering environmental and social aspects through its financial operations. Starting in 2022, we ended up included in our system, SARAS, thinking about the consideration of things that could be done and presented in these credit operations. So we tried to fund activities found in regions that are protected and that do not have any deforestation. So we were able to channel several national projects with the social environmental aspects included. And that's how we saw an opportunity to be able to, through BID, get some financing that would help and take care of the Amazon. Always considering that the Amazon territory represents 43% of the territory of Ecuador. And we have 15% of the species in the world. And this helps in regulating climate because of the diversity. And besides all of that, we also have the importance of the species. We have many species that have to do with climatic changes. So that's why we have 16 million for the care of the environment and biodiversity through this bioeconomy. And this is channeled through the cooperatives, and you also have the sustainable agriculture and in the forest as well, and generating value to the products that are found in the Amazon. Ecotourism as well. And CONAFIPS has already advanced a lot to be able to channel these resources in a very assertive and correct manner. So the first step that was given, this was done, there was research done that included the cooperatives that already exist in the territory. So we have 10 credit cooperatives in the region, and we worked with them to check the potential of their portfolio. So talking about bioeconomy. So what they were working on to be able to help the best practices in agriculture and how they elaborated the products made in the Amazon, like creams and shampoos. Maybe this had not been mapped before. So we started there, we started mapping all of this. We saw that we have 1.2 million in potential for bioeconomy, starting in the best practices. And this was a step to show that all the cooperatives can understand and have several possibilities. They can innovate with their credit products, and they can also create different products and generate this supply for people who are in that territory. So as a result, CONAFIPS started working with a taxonomy of this bioeconomy. Why? Because we need the credit officials to identify this, to see what the activities of bioeconomy are, so that we can avoid this lack of resources and have the resources get to the right place in the correct manner. And also with the change in the soil so that non-endemic species go into the territories. So we don't create a taxonomy where we establish eligibility criteria already established by the BID that has adjusted itself according to the requirements of the project. And as a result, with the codes that are used by the cooperatives, we can determine the activities that are being funded, and we can also determine, as from the research we do, the potential activities that can be developed in the Amazon and that were determined with the bioeconomy. So for example, cocoa, transformation, generating added value in the Amazon. When we think, for example, about manioc or the transformation or making of cream and ice cream as well. So we look for the investment that is needed or that the entrepreneurs need to develop the bioeconomy in our region. So the next steps, we have already approved the list of products. We already have the resources. And the next steps will be the placement of all this inside the cooperatives so that they will be able to disclose these products. And we're also going to develop technological tools to be able to make this access to credit easier. And also, even if we have a taxonomy, it's also going to be important to look at other tools that can reduce our costs. And we can also strengthen the credit capacity, because even if it's true that the people who are working there, they work with funding, with the financial aspect, but we have to strengthen this capacity, and they need to identify the possibilities for new business. This is very important. And based on all of this, we can start looking at the work in the Amazon region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria Jose. A very interesting program. So financing the funding companies, and not only that, but produce all of the skills and the training and help them so that the credit will reach the right place. And this is the interesting work that CONAFIPS has been doing in Ecuador. Now, Ivy Figueroa, considering the IFC, what are the strategies that the IFC has been creating to connect the funding to the sociobioeconomy? What are the programs and the investments that you have made in this sense? Welcome. I think your microphone is not on. Now it is, right? Okay. So thank you, Marcelo, first of all, for the invitation. Can you hear me well? A little better now, Evie. So first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. And I'd also like to speak in another language because my Portuguese is not very good. So if you can reduce the volume of your other audio so then we won't have this echo. Is that better? Can you hear me? I think so, yes, Evie. All right.
It is structured around 3 pillars. The first is Green Amazon, which talks about the safeguarding natural assets for a healthy forest biome. The second one is Prosperous Amazon, which is the support of sustainable, nature-smart, and inclusive economic development. And lastly, the third pillar is Livable Amazon, which seeks to improve the lives, the standard of living of the population. So we recognize that in the past, government policies and agencies and donors as well, working in the Amazon, have focused on conservation and reforestation. And this third pillar of Livable Amazon really seeks to include dwellers and respect their way of life. They are, after all, part of the ecosystem. And without affording them economic opportunities, it will be challenging to continue the work on conservation and reforestation. And why is that? Well, because without economic opportunities, there's a potential for them to turn to unsustainable practices for their own survival. And I wanted to share a story which still is very close to my heart. But last year, I met a group of ladies in the outskirts of Tarapoto in the Peruvian Amazon, about 3 hours out. And they explained to us that with technical assistance and access to funding, they had switched from growing coca, so the basis for cocaine, right, for which they had to deforest, to growing cacao, for which productivity was improved by the shade of standing trees. So that, I think, exemplifies what, turning unsustainable or preventing, giving opportunity, economic opportunities, so that the population dwellers don't have to resort to unsustainable practices. And we are trying to support this type of shift. In Brazil, although geographically the Amazonia region takes 60% of the territory, less than 10% of the GDP comes from the Amazonia region. So clearly there's a big opportunity to improve. And I wanted to mention a publication by the World Bank, by the IBRD, I believe it was 2024. That is a good reference publication. And part of it compares Brazil as a middle-income country to the Brazilian Amazon as if it were a country, which would certainly not be an upper middle-income country. And for example, we have data that the Brazilian Amazon, if it were a country again, compared to Brazil, has only half of the GDP per capita. Life expectancy is lower, internet availability is lower, and the quality is glitchy, is much lower. Access to sanitation is also half that of the rest of Brazil. Similarly, in terms of access to fresh water. But I work in the financial institutions group, like I said at the beginning, and so I'm drawn to sharp delineations of sectors. What do I mean by that? So the financial systems are mostly represented by banks, but also large institutional investors like pension funds, insurance company, and they are all highly regulated, right, to protect savers, pensioners. So the challenges for the private sector in the Amazon are similar to that of governments to reach individuals, and that is small ticket size, dispersed population, weak or non-existent infrastructure and logistics, right? So how do we entice the private sector to find opportunities in the Amazon in a sustainable way? So first, we had to do some internal work and start blurring the lines of our own internal departments by working, for example, the financial institutions team, my team, working together with the agribusiness team or the forestry team within IFC, but also reaching out to IBRD, for example. They do work in carbon sinks, and some of our projects can benefit from that, from those projects, right? The common denominator in all of our projects is that we think the best path is the financing with the capacity building that Marcelo mentioned at the beginning in parallel, right? It's giving that knowledge in the various angles that is needed by the particular project. And IFC, World Bank Group, we do not have enough money or even knowledge to engage in the Amazon, right? So besides working across departments within IFC and the World Bank, there is an imperative need to join forces with the local partners, creating a network even for a single project, right? Sometimes projects can have 8, 10, 12 partners, right? And this is due to the very specific needs of the projects in terms of the knowledge and also the financial structures, right? You have philanthropists, you have blended finance, commercial lenders, right? So our idea is to build pilots, prototypes of models that seem to have good opportunity for scalability, right? Again, working in the financial institutions group, my interest is in providing people with access to financing that can then improve their lives, for example, increasing productivity or having that working capital to prepare for the next crop, etc., while in parallel providing the knowledge to the final beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy. Muito bom ouvir aí pouquinho também
It's
sobre
great to hear about the potential of the Amazon, the Brazilian Amazon in general, and the bioeconomy as well, and how inside your organization, a large international group, you were able to make internal adaptations to be able to get to this place that we have been discussing and hearing about, and how important it is to bring together a multiplicity of organizations to be able to learn collectively. I think this is one of the great things of the Pan-Amazon Network and the task force for funding, which is exactly what we want to promote. And finally, we have Rodrigue from the Pachamama Foundation. So please tell us a little bit about the role of the foundation in supporting the traditional population and the production chains of the sub-economy, or what an organization like your foundation can do to defend rights and promote the rights of territories and make their contribution, a little bit of the work that you've been developing to be able to connect funding to your sub-economy. Rodrigue? Hello, good afternoon. Good morning to everyone. I also heard the other participants. And in the Pachamama Foundation, I'm going to just give you a little introduction. We've been working in Ecuador for more than 20 years in the Amazon and also in the central part and mid part of Peru. And in general, in this alliance with the populations and the different nationalities that live in this territory, we try to protect them, and we have developed several projects, a health project or about human rights, and there were emblematic cases. There are some cases that you probably heard about. So the population that is isolated, and the foundation has always tried to lend a hand to this population. There was an episode in 2017 where the Pachamama Foundation had to change its methodology a little bit and saw the needs with regard to how to generate money in these territories and create alternative economies, of course, respecting what was shared with regard to the area, and how they created an economy at the same time, and they generated commercial connections or new connections. So this is there was a new project in the Pachamama Foundation called the Economy of the Forest. And the main focus of this project was to have sustainable work and also how to generate part of this economy. So this grew, for example, because of the technical production that can be summarized through, for example, chakra, the term that was used. There's also the added value of the sales. I'm also going to talk about that. And also research and innovation, and also based on the threat of the climatic conditions, the advancing of extractivist activities, oil, and also sustainable possibilities. There's also gastronomy, because we notice that there's something that connects with the people in the city and the capital and other regions, is the topic of gastronomy. So when we travel to other countries, we always remember what we eat. So gastronomy is also seen as a connection to know about the products that women usually cook, and in the Amazon, and the products that are found in the Amazon for cooking. And this is also a possibility to generate some sort of revenue. And following up with this work, we have special values given to the sector. For example, in moretti. Moretti is known in Peru. It's a fruit from a palm tree in the Amazon. And to be able to get to an impactful topic, we always work with alliances. The challenge that we have in bioeconomy in general is to find a buyer, but a buyer that is aligned to the systems and the methodologies of sustainability that we've been working on in this territory. So this year we found the group ASHI, and with this company, we developed these sectors. So we have camu, moretti, and cocona. We have all these fruits, and we now make juices out of them. And we decided to work with this company in different territories to also be able to do the harvesting in a sustainable manner in the forest, because usually you have to have new plantations and production systems that have not been established or not being shared in the forest. We have to take advantage of the fruit that is growing there and allowing an important percentage in the region as well. That's important. And we are basing ourselves on the principle that the foundation respects things there, and we're always consulting and socializing this possibility, either with the communities that have this demand, and they're also aligned to the principles of this consultation. And in this way, they generated a good alliance, and it's a multinational company that is very well known on the Southern Hemisphere. And we have local communities, a local branch that has access through rivers and entries. And from that, there was some beautiful work done preparing people how to go up that palm tree, how to climb that palm tree and not fall. And we gave this to the communities, and the company's commitment was to buy 50 tons of this fruit. So for that, we generated a whole chain of value, from the harvesting and then fair payment to people. We also created a company, we created a machine to be able to take this to the companies, so to take the product to the company. And we have a product from the forest that generated great exports. And this is being generated through this value chain, from the harvest, the production, and the fair payment, and the strengthening of technology, and also the addition of values in a city of Cucuyo in the Amazon. So they take this fruit and they make pulp from it. And it's a beautiful example that I can tell you in this first presentation, with the alliance in the private sector and a good donor, which was the French Development Agency, and a foundation, plus the community. So we always work together with other companies. That's my first presentation. Thank you very much, Rodrigue. And I think this is the point. This point that you bring is very important in the alliances. You talked about a very successful case, a very interesting case with Guari, And I don't know if they were say it's our buriti. Guahi is buriti in Portuguese, the fruit that he was talking about. And it's accompanying the elements of gastronomy and the interest of consumers in providing support for these forest products. And you can also have the interest of funding companies because there is the commercial possibility, there's also philanthropy, giving support so that these processes can work. And there's also an important example of how this alliance can actually bring this. And inside the Amazonian Coalition, we also believe in mobilizing the population in general. So they will know more about the Amazon, so they will know more about the products of the Amazon in gastronomy, as Rodrigue said, but also for medicinal purposes or cosmetic purposes. These are the main uses of the biodiversity in the forest. And we always want to promote campaigns for this awareness, to make awareness grow about the potential, the huge potential that these Amazonian products have. And this is one of the projects of the Amazonian Coalition to get to the public outside the Amazon so that this consumption can be increased, and always taking care with the safeguards that are necessary and respecting the biodiversity and the forest, the standing forest and the flowing rivers. Within this logic of having greater assimilation by the population itself and biodiversity in the Amazon, you have the interest, the commercial interest, and we also promote the connection between large companies and business in the forest. And we have also been supporting Rede Origens from Imaflora that also helps us to create these connections between large companies and indigenous business and community business and the populations by the river sides. And funding come as a consequence. As soon as there is this demand, the funding comes in, and that's why we're talking about funding as a response with this kind of guarantee, and after the understanding that there is the possibility of commercial sales, once again respecting the limits of biodiversity. So now, between the first and the second round, I'm going to invite the production to show a video that was prepared from research that was done by NASH. NASH is the leader in the funding task force. It's a business incubator, and we share the leadership of task force, and they prepared a video for us to watch. So could you please run this video for us?
Eu me chamo Cairo Bastos, sou gerente de programas na Neste. A Neste, que é uma ONG especializada em investimentos de impacto. Nós atuamos na Amazônia brasileira desde 2020 e já apoiamos mais de 50 cooperativas e associações que trabalham com a sociobioeconomia. Eu venho trazer um super convite para vocês, que é a leitura do nosso relatório. Publicamos ano passado, se chama Destravando o Potencial do Ecossistema Mundial de Financiamento para uma bioeconomia sustentável na Amazônia e pela perspectiva das comunidades locais. Esse relatório, que a gente compartilha o link com vocês, é um relatório direcionado principalmente para investidores como bancos multilaterais, investidores públicos ou privados, que desejam investir na sociobioeconomia ou querem melhorar os seus investimentos. Para que todos nós possamos aprender como melhor investir na sociobioeconomia liderada localmente. Então, esse relatório ele é muito importante e inovador porque ele realmente traz insights, pensamentos muito importantes sobre desafios e soluções que comunidades ribeirinhas, quilombolas, indígenas enfrentam na ponta e que eles apontam como essenciais para um investimento mais coerente, mais eficiente, mais eficaz para a sociobioeconomia. Eu convido vocês para a leitura, sei que vocês vão gostar bastante, e convido vocês a se interarem mais no debate sobre a sociobioeconomia e como a gente deseja construir uma economia pungente, sustentável, mas, sobretudo, liderada localmente pelas comunidades amazônicas. Um abraço.
Thank you, Cairo. Thank you, Nest. You've been doing an excellent job giving voice to the traditional population of the Amazon, and they have been supporting with resources and trainings and connections, not only in Brazil, but also in Peru and Ecuador and in Colombia, and with a huge portfolio of cooperative associations and business as from the traditional population. So now I'm going to call Major Andrade Cerda from COFINAI to tell us a little bit about how you see the perspectives, in the indigenous perspective, the importance of these alliances, these organizations that dedicate themselves to supporting the promotion of this well-being economy based on diversity and respecting not only this, but the animals in the forest. How do you see the potential of these alliances and these examples where you get together the philanthropic capital, the NGO, that of the NGOs and the companies, and also the main players of bioeconomy? Well, first of all, thank you very much for showing the video. And these are some of the enterprises that we support, and we're very close to them. And this reflects upon how the alliances that are working, they work much better together instead of working by themselves independently. So we have this process of the business accelerators. We have 4 companies right now who are following this model, and they are dealing with moving over to a high level of production and commercialization inside the Ecuadorian Amazon. So we have 4 enterprises that we follow up directly. The association follows up directly, and also the local indigenous organization follows them up. So you can see that the governance model that is being used now in this business accelerator, it is being followed up by the indigenous organizations, because in this way, we are strengthening both of the sectors. So in other words, here in Ecuador, there's a lot of resilience, and they say that the indigenous population is against development. And we have extractivist activities, mining and oil, but this kind of work, this kind of movement in the business, it shows that we also have another positive side of generating in these economies and generating these public initiatives that allow us to take care of nature, as well as contributing towards the system that they are working with. So alliances are based on that. They respect the governance model, they co-create it, and of course you have to outline some payments for each of the activities with these players. So in our case, we are responsible for the technical aspects and the representation of the indigenous communities, because many times what happens, there is a project that wants to develop some sort of economy in the Amazon, and you have this organizational structure that the indigenous population has. So many times there are good factors that want to make alliances directly with the community, and many times this procedure changes the dynamics and how the indigenous communities collaborate between them for the existence of the territory. And so what we do over here is this representation of the organizations, and we basically put all the technicians in the field. They follow up the producers, the indigenous producers, and our allies as well. And they also supply the capacities we're talking about. And this is the level of governance that we want to have. And we invite all of you, and we're hearing that the indigenous communities, they have to promote this, because it is possible when you have clear measures. It is possible to do that. Thank you, Maria Jose. You're bringing up a fundamental subject, which is the representativeness. So yesterday, we heard about the importance of the traditional indigenous population involved with sociobioeconomy, and they are also involved in the governance and the design, so that it's not only funding, but all of the actions that have to do with the development of the forest economy, so that all of them can respect this whole knowledge, the existing knowledge, and the potential of biodiversity. So Maria Jose Lopez, you told us a little bit about the credit programs that are prepared and that are being implemented actually by CONAFIPS. Since the learning about the credit cooperatives, how do you see the need for representativeness? And you told us a little bit about how you strengthen the capacity of these capital providers, but how does it work inside the program in the view that this representativeness have? The credit takers, right? The people who are going to use the resources to promote these positive impacts and the products in the sociobioeconomy. How do you approach this in your work? Thank you very much for the question. It's very important to be able to design products that are motivated and adapted according to the needs of the region. In this case, the topic of bioeconomy, the objective that it has, is to have products that have a smaller rate of interest compared to normal, and they can be accessible to the people who need them. So one of the main comments that we hear in the territory, it's a topic about how to be able to access credit. People who have no history of credit, how can they get access to it? How can we make this financial system accessible to everyone in the territory? So we work with all of these beneficiaries, all of these cooperatives, so that this credit can be accessible. It's no use designing a product in a bioeconomy when it's not going to be able to advance because the cooperative doesn't understand the sector of the business or the opportunity that is presented, and to benefit the end customer. So they had no history of credit, so they were not able to get credit for this. We also have the elaboration of different tools to be able to conclude all of these gaps. We have a fund that is going to assume these losses of the cooperatives. The cooperatives are also afraid of the beneficiaries, because they are afraid because they maybe are not going to receive, they're not going to have a return on this credit. So we have a fund that we call losses, where CONAFIPS is going to assume the loss so that the cooperative can be confident and put the bioeconomy into action. So I was talking about the cooperatives. You can understand that it's not complicated developing several programs and projects for the implementation of this credit. The topic of bioeconomy and together with the knowledge from our ancestors, everything that we identified between restaurants in our region in the Amazon with typical dishes from our region. And that's why we're trying to work on all the opportunities that can provide financial results and can take advantage of the funding and with benefits like the interest rates and everything else and other additional things like the payment terms and things like that. So the topic is to be able to look at all the needs and fill in all the gaps when we talk about a financial institution that is afraid of the funding or provide access to funding because of the end beneficiaries, and above all for the indigenous population. Thank you, Maria Jose. So you bring a little bit of the experience of a mechanism that can observe losses, a mechanism that comes from resources. And many times we see the philanthropic resources acting in this sense, trying to promote a reduction of the risk or the creation of greater comfort or greater propension for the investors and the credit providers so that they can start funding the socio-bio organizations more. And this is great. And we hear a lot about blended finance in the coalition. We're going to also launch support. It's a financial mechanism in Brazil that is very important, that takes all of these points into consideration, like promoting technical training, the famous technical assistance, so that this will also be a pillar for reducing risk. Because these actors and this business from sociobio, so that all of them can have access to a series of tools for management as well as others, making credit be well used and will provide a return to the funding companies, and so that the business will be able to create a positive and beneficial impact to biodiversity. And Evie, you mentioned that you try to unify several players to be able to create pilot projects where this scale can be seen. So tell us a little bit about IFC, about this sort of blended finance approach and this capital that is referred to as patient capital, because there's tolerance to risk and it can actually cover losses, and many times it is even symbolic. And we know that the IFC has this role, and it comes in to some operations, some credit operations, providing this kind of support and also attracting other kinds of private capital. So in your perspective, how does this work, and what kind of experience do you have in this kind of approach, the systemic investment approach and multi-capital as well? Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay. So we have another example that we started maybe 2.5 years ago, and it's very similar to what Rodrigue was saying, which is basically having another company that already works in the Amazon. So in this case, it's Natura, that also obtains its products, some of its products from the Amazon, right? They obtain these products for their product lines, their cosmetic product lines, and then we go into this. So they started to design a mechanism And what they needed was exactly that. They needed to attract others. And then this is where we come in. So this was a way of getting receivables from several cooperatives. So we started with 11, now we have 13. So each cooperative has maybe 150 members to 800. And the work of explaining to the members what they were signing, that's very important, because sometimes they sign things and they don't know what they're doing, right? They don't know what they have to do in the future. So we came in to the mezzanine and the senior part. Natura came in with the first loss. So they have worked in the Amazon for more than 20 years. And we needed a partner that had experience, local experience, and a partner that was open to this sort of thing. And so we were able to attract or provide awareness, and we were able to open up to the market and explain it. And through this, this 1.5 years since we placed this mechanism, we were able to say that, you know, this is a loan that is going to be repaid in 3, 6, or 12 months. And until today, we've had zero problems, zero interest rates. And when this grows, definitely the end beneficiaries are people, mostly who have never had any access to funding. So we are providing them with this credit history that Maria talked about, which is extremely important. So they don't know the mechanism to launch it, so that other people will get excited to participate. And there's also the elements of technical assistance, rural assistance, financial literacy. So learning how the mechanisms work and not being afraid of it, because the first time that they hear this, they don't understand it. And if they don't understand it, they don't want to use it, right? So it's mechanisms that give them this sort of support so that they will understand what it is, and they will understand what the commitments they will have in the future. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Evie. So that was very interesting. This financial mechanism that also has these differences, different layers of tolerance to risk, and how it works to fund the production chains. So Rodrigue, it's your turn to tell us a little bit more about the funding, right? So you brought the example of the AHIB group, and how through the Moretti chain, the Buriti chain, it was possible to leverage a production chain and export and have alliances in the production sector, in the private sector, in terms of biodiversity. But tell us a little bit about the role of philanthropic capital when it goes into this kind of arrangement, and how this brings possibilities for private capital, the funding. So how funding enters this, and how you have seen this connection of funding and sociobioeconomy in the regions where you act. Thank you, Marcelo. That's a good question. It's a great challenge, right? Because with the boom of bioeconomy, we don't really have a single model. And also, where we are in the Amazon, there are contexts that are really different. So there are territories that have access to rivers, others to roads, and sometimes it's needs that are not associated to bioeconomy. They're not translated in bioeconomy. But about the question of the participation in projects, we, as much as possible, we try to look for funding that is aligned to the principles of the foundation, because as Majo also said, Majo de Andrade said that there are some of the companies, they come in with their demands and their indicators, and these are not according to the reality found in the territory, right? So you have the numbers, and sometimes they're difficult to achieve in a very short time. So we believe that the private sector has to be at the table of this cooperation. Before, we didn't used to do that. Before, the private sector was just very negative, or was seen as being very negative. And it was the private sector, the only private sector that came in was the extractivism companies. And these companies want innovative cosmetic products. Sometimes they only need a small quantity of the products or a small transformation of this product, you know, something from the forest. And then you can find connections or the possible development. And the private sector also asking them to look at the needs so that there's an exchange and a responsibility, a shared responsibility. Because if you only put the responsibility in the cooperation, we know that the cooperative has a limit. And if you don't have involvement from the beginning, just like a company does, sometimes the cooperation doesn't work and the project doesn't work out because there's no strengthening or commitment installed from the beginning with the company. So this is something that we also want to do. We want to tell the local credit companies, like here in the Amazon, to generate new green credits that they have been talking about for a while, but they don't get to the territories. And we also see the need of the Amazon to generate data. So we don't have a lot of data, and the data that is being generated doesn't usually have good indicators. So it's good to have everyone sitting together, and those that want the reading of the territory. And with this kind of data, it will be much better, much easier to knock on the doors of these funding companies that need data as a basis, right? So just knocking on their door and ask for a lot of money without any kind of concrete information, it becomes more complicated, right? So it's a need that we're building now. That's very important. Thank you, Rodrigue. This kind of work also has to be done. You also need to have data. And I think this is a discussion that we would be able to continue talking about this topic and the standardization of the need for data while we're talking about distinct territories and production chains that are different, where the notion of standardization has to be seen. So this is a topic that I hope other panels will talk about, but you also bring a very important point about this co-responsibility. And inside the Amazonian Coalition, we understand this to be very important. And innovation, where the capital providers, and especially these new capital companies that are interested in funding the sub-economy, they also have to be at the table to understand these differences and the diversity and adjust their mechanisms, not invalidating the issues, and the responsibility of the financial sector, but trying to adapt models and create innovative solutions that will address the different needs of socioeconomy. And that's different from a conventional economy, as we heard from Maria Jose Andrade. So it is an economy based on the forest, and it is something that has to look at the long term and the well-being of these human populations. So I'm going to call each one now to make your last final remarks, let's say, maybe 1 minute each, focusing on the people who are watching us. What should they do? What can they do? What is the call to action? And maybe there are some questions in the chat, but we can't see them. But, you know, how you can interact with the population. So what are your final remarks, Maria Jose Andrade? And then I'm not going to call, but, you know, following the same order, Maria Jose Lopez, Evie, and Rodrigue, just for us to use the last few minutes of our panel. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I believe that it's important to see how in this panel we have several people from Ecuador, and the important thing is that we're promoting something and we have to be together and work together. The indigenous economy, the economy cannot be seen only in terms of nature, right? The nature doesn't do things by itself. We also have to work with the indigenous populations. There's the human factor that we also provide. And I think that's the main thing that we have to get from the dialogues that we are having, and also supporting the leadership of the indigenous population. That is extremely important. The Pachamamas have worked with FIPS, and we know that they are inside the Ecuadorian, the Amazon, the Ecuadorian Amazon, and we also have the Investor Coalition, we have FIPS, and all of the players are together so that we can have a more sustainable Amazon, and there's no way we can return from that. Thank you very much. Well, from my side, as I said, I think it is essential to talk about articulating all of us together so that we can strengthen our efforts. Climatic conditions are happening, and all of this funding has to be destined to protect this area that is very sensitive to what is happening. And also in the funding, this has to be something sustainable. So it's a lot of work there's a lot of work to be done. But if we combine all of these different players, it becomes much easier for these opportunities. And we can also attract more funding that will be able to promote this conservation of the biodiversity. So here in CONAFIPS, we are very open to joining efforts so that we can potentialize this topic of bioeconomy, and the people who can hear us, they can also consume these products developed by the indigenous populations. Evie, we can't hear you. Your microphone is off. Now can you hear me? Yes, now we can. All right. Yeah, I was saying that on our side in the private sector, we have to change our chip because it's a different way of doing business. And in business in the Amazon, this is exactly what my companion said in the panel. We have to make these alliances, and not only with the population, but also bringing the governments to it, because in many moments, this is very important to have the support of the government. And I believe that I can talk about LFC, IFC, it is really changing the way of thinking about how to approach a business and having to work with several different partners, and also, you know, not only having one partner, not having only one institution, for example, for technical assistance. That's it. Well, thank you. I wanted to conclude saying that the bioeconomy is not the solution, it's part of the solution. And all of the situations, especially now in the Ecuadorian Amazon, it's not only one methodology, one way of doing things. That's not going to solve all the necessities. Bioeconomy has to be inside a holistic plan. It is a topic of governance, has to respond to needs that are sometimes urgent and emerging. So the issue of education, of health, and the topic of also respecting the plans of different nationalities and auto-determination. So if there is a different way of seeing the economy, then you have to respect it. And sometimes what they demand, or when they have this need, they will be able to address it. So I'd like to invite all of the partners to be as innovative as possible, because in the Amazon, when we reduce to this point of no return, we have to get to the highest point. We have to take all of the best technologies, we have to get the best initiatives, and create the best alliance to get innovation. Thank you very much, Rodrigue, Ivy, Maria Jose Lopez, and Maria Jose Andrade. Thank you very much to everyone who is listening. And thank you also to Joanna and the whole group from WRI and the BID and the other partners. I think the idea of the Pan-Amazonic network of bioeconomy is to try and create this collaboration. And I'd like to invite everyone who is listening to look for us in case they can also join us in this effort, which is a collective effort that is quite big. And we're talking about funding today, and we're talking about different fronts. They're also very important for us to have standing forest and flowing rivers, an economy that is based on biodiversity and the territorial rights and cultural rights of the populations that live not only in the forest part of the Amazon, but their needs can also be respected and well-being can be achieved over the years. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Obrigado. And see you soon.